We are here on the last day of phase 3 of tranche 3 of the undercover policing inquiry. Only a few days ago, on the 11th anniversary of the launch of it, the Home Office launched a consultation. It was the last day of Keir Starmer's premiership, and this consultation looks into the future of the inquiry. It was pretty clear to all of us that this was an attempt by the Home Office to shut down the current process, the undercover police inquiry as it currently stands. We feel this is an attack on the overwhelming need to look at the abuses of the spy cops and the way in which, though we've gone through the historic unit, the Special Demonstration Squad, we have yet to get to the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, whose officers committed some of the worst abuses, and that impacted myself and Kate Wilson, who joins me today, and so many of the people who were initially involved in campaigning against the deployment of undercover officers into protest groups. Today, the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance has launched a response to this consultation. We've asked people not to fill in the form, which we believe is a trap to lead towards the inquiry as it currently stands to be turned into something much less significant. Kate, do you want to talk us through what we're going to do?
Yeah, so when the Home Office first launched their consultation, we went and had a look at it to see what it was saying. And our original plan was to say, get everybody to fill it in and say, look, this inquiry is really important and it needs to continue and it needs to be a statutory public inquiry and it needs to fulfill the terms of reference that it has. And we looked through the consultation and it is not an option to fill in the consultation and say that. The consultation is basically a trap in order to provide statistics to say people think this is more important than that. It doesn't give the option that the inquiry needs to continue as it is. So we have taken the difficult decision of saying, don't fill in the Home Office consultation. We wrote to the Home Office asking them to withdraw the consultation. They have not withdrawn the consultation. They have extended the deadline into September. So we now have until the 20th of September to respond to the consultation. And they have said that they will accept responses by email. So what we're launching today is we've made a website where people can easily send an email response to the Home Office. We've written a response that represents our demands, but it's there to be edited. You can put your own thoughts in if you want. You can take it all out and write your own email if you want. But the
link is below, by the way, on all platforms.
In the comments. We feel it's really important that people let the Home Office know that this inquiry is important. The inquiry has been going on for a long time. It has raised some really important issues. It has got a lot of media coverage. It has led to some very significant evidence and apologies from the Metropolitan Police for what happened. But I think it's really important to say that there's dozens of people who are affected by what the undercover police did.
Hundreds.
Well, there's hundreds of people affected by what they did, but dozens of them are core participants in this inquiry, have been engaged in the inquiry since 2015, and have not yet had any evidence or investigation or input about what happened to them. So although the inquiry feels like it's been going on for a very long time and there's sometimes fuss about how much it is costing, in fact some of the most important stuff is yet to be considered. And particularly we've heard a lot of quite powerful evidence over the past couple of weeks. We're getting to the end of the SDS. The people giving evidence, the managers, are the ones who said this is a shit show, we've got to shut it down, and they're giving quite powerful evidence about just how bad it was. But there's been a lot of talk about it was bad because they weren't properly trained under the National Accredited Training. It was bad because there wasn't intrusive oversight of the deployments. It was bad because it was all set up before the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and before the National Intelligence Model. And I think what's really important is the stuff that's going to be looked at now, what happened to me, what happened to you, and the abuses that still remain to be looked at, happened under more intrusive surveillance with officers who were trained under the National Accredited Model, in a time where the Human Rights Act and the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act were in force. And so, I mean, and it has come up in the evidence, you know, what went wrong? What went wrong there? And that's the really key question for making recommendations and protecting people today from the kind of abuses that we saw.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it is like when we've just been talking, the last video I did with Emily Apple, we were talking about how wonderful it is to hear a former manager of the SDS kind of be so condemning of them. But he also kind of said that, you know, this wouldn't happen again. This is all changed now. But we know that the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, which was operating at the same time and continued for years afterwards, was doing all of the worst of these things, continuing to, despite all this, the infrastructure that was in place. And I mean, I think there's a great danger that any lessons that are learned are going to be based on a completely false premise if the inquiry doesn't go on to look at that unit and to look at all the other things that we're going to supposedly meant to be looked at in tranche 5. I mean, also, I think it's really important on the cost. There's a lot being made of the cost of the inquiry, and it is enormously expensive, and I think it's ridiculous how expensive it is. But people should remember that the vast majority of the hearings are taking place in closed. The vast majority of the costs of the inquiry are relating to the redaction process that stops us from having the full disclosure of what happened. I think there is, you know, furthermore, actually, one of the most important things I think is that so much of the costs are already baked in. And if they want to save money, the main area they could save money is by reducing the disclosure to the people who were affected by the deployments, to the people like us. So, I mean, when people say, oh, it shouldn't be so expensive, well, that's going to mean cutting possibly the most important part of this entire process. And when we talk about how long it's taken, I mean, the reason it's taken so long is because the police have brought in judicial reviews, have applied for anonymity. We didn't get into the actual substantive nature of the inquiry for the first 5 years. So when we say it's gone on for 11 years, it's actually gone on for 6.
Yeah.
The first 5 years were all the police trying to drag the process down, stop it from getting started, prevent officers from being put into the glare of publicity, which they were very successful at. The vast majority of undercover police have complete anonymity through this process. Making sure as much as possible took place in closed, so that we only get all the stuff that I cover. It's all in these videos, only a very small part of what actually went on and what is going on in this inquiry process, because so much happens in closed. I mean, there are closed hearings which I'm not allowed to attend, but there's huge numbers of secret hearings. Probably a great deal more, certainly a great deal more undercover officers than the ones we're looking at, who are, if they are being called, we have no idea how many are being called. We just have no details about it whatsoever. And if we want if we want this process to have any use at all, it must be allowed to complete. The reason they want to shut it down is because we are getting to officers and events that are much more recent than what we've been looking at for the majority of time. There is a greater degree of embarrassment possible to not just the undercover officers themselves, but the managers, the politicians who oversaw it. If this process is to mean anything at all, it must look at the National Public Order Intelligence Unit. It must do much more than it already has. This attempt to shut it down is absolutely appalling. And I really, really urge anybody who has any interest in this process, who's been following proceedings in any way, to please, it's not going to take you very long. It's a very simple process. I'm sure you're used to it on other online sites where you basically put your email address in and you press send. You are able to personalize that as much as you like, and please do if you can. But if you can't, just put your email address in and press send. We really need to get as much support as we possibly can. We'll over the next weeks and months, we're going to be reaching out to as many different organizations who are affected, those who weren't, trade unions. If you're able to do this, please do so as well. Please share this link with your friends, with your comrades. We want to be able to absolutely flood the inquiry with the strength of public feeling on this topic, because it is essential that this inquiry continues in the way it's currently set up. We'd love to see it improve, quite frankly. That clearly isn't on the table at the moment, but the idea that it could be downgraded into a release of some documents to some people is totally unacceptable.
Yes, and I think that any of the ways, basically, I mean, there are ways that they could make it cheaper, make it faster, but all of the ones that I would consider to be acceptable involve forcing the state to trust the public and put stuff out without having 35 different police forces check it over first and decide whether it poses a risk to national security or policing practice or whatever. And they would have to, I mean, you know, there is a chance that the Hillsborough law is going to be in force by the end of this year. And, you know, forcing candor and openness from the state would be cheaper and would be quicker.
Yes.
But unless they do that, all of the other ways that they could make the inquiry go faster or cheaper involve taking away justice from the victims and taking away protection, because the point about this inquiry, you know, the reason why they called a public inquiry is because there were so many abuses going on among undercover policing, and the inquiry is supposed to make recommendations for the future to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and it can't do that unless it applies all of, you know, the Home Office questionnaire basically asks you to pit competing priorities against each other. And that includes answers for victims. It includes the investigative process. It includes making recommendations for the future. And it's like, well, all of those things, and it includes accountability. All of those things are an essential part of any meaningful public inquiry. And saying that you're going to have a public inquiry where we don't bother investigating, we just make recommendations for the future, or we don't worry about accountability or hearing from the victims, you know, we just investigate what the police did and make recommendations. I mean, it's just, there is a very real risk. The questions that they are asking they matter. They would have a significant effect and a significant impact on the effectiveness of the inquiry. And it's really important to say what you say about the baked in costs. A lot of the work has already been done. So if the inquiry is curtailed or shut down, then that is a load of public money that was wasted because it was never brought to fruition and it never resulted in meaningful justice, accountability and recommendations.
Another thing I think was really important is that we mustn't lose sight of how we got to the point we got to public inquiry. Before 2015, when the inquiry was called, there were numerous legal cases being brought, civil cases brought. We brought some of them. I mean, you most significantly brought the one that went to the IPT. Now, through all of those legal proceedings, one of the most common phrases that kept came out, well, this is going to be looked at by the public inquiry. And there was a belief that the lack of, in the case of your case, the IPT, the fact that, you know, no witnesses were brought from the police, that was a reason. Well, okay, well, there's a public inquiry happening. I know other people have brought cases that have been settled out of court with the understanding that, well, this is going to be settled by the public inquiry. The public inquiry will look at this. That's going to deal with it all. Get rid of the public inquiry, and you're looking at a situation where, no, those things haven't been looked at. And actually, it's opening up a huge can of worms that's going to result in a resumption of civil litigation against the state, against the police, which is going to, if you want to save money, is going to make it much worse. I think the state needs to realize that the public inquiry was a compromise, as far as we were concerned, as people who are affected by undercover policing, and that with this process, is what we're doing instead of bringing further civil litigation. There's so many options available for us to do things, to complain about the deployments, and this process gives us a vehicle to do that in a way in which allows the state to also learn the lessons itself. And I find it incredibly foolish of them to try and take that away.
Yes, I mean, there's a number. The IPT is one, as you say, where they said, you know, we are very unhappy about the fact that we've not been able to hear from any of the police officers involved in this, and we take comfort from the fact that there is a public inquiry that is going to complete those investigations. Likewise, the Judicial Review Board, looking at the miscarriages of justice around Ratcliffe, said it's very important that the public inquiry looks into this. These are all part of what is going to be abandoned if the inquiry is curtailed. So ucpi.uk is the site where we have our, there you go, it's up on the screen. You can fill it in a few seconds, really. Just your name, your email, or you can have a think about it, have a read of some of the material, and write your own response to the Home Office. But we are very strongly asking people not to fill in the Home Office's own consultation form, because and you know, it was a difficult decision to make, to say that, because it would be so much easier just to say flood the Home Office with responses, but there are no good answers to the questions that they're asking. It's all about pitting priorities against each other, and the option to continue with a properly resourced statutory public inquiry looking at the full range of terms of reference just isn't included in the options that it gives.
I mean, I think it should be also, we really need to stress, this consultation was not a result of any communication that any of us had with the inquiry, with the state. It was a shock to the inquiry. It was a shock to us as the victims of undercover policing. We've been demanding meetings with the Home Office.
We asked the Home Office for a meeting in 2024, and they replied saying it would be inappropriate to meet with us because the inquiry is supposed to be independent. And so it would be inappropriate for the Home Office sponsor department to meet with victims of the matters that the inquiry is investigating. Suddenly, they don't think it's inappropriate to launch this consultation, and yeah, we have asked again for a meeting. They claim that they care about, you know, the victims and justice and accountability and all of those things. But the reality is, what they've done is they have launched a consultation that, on the face of it, appears to be seeking verification and justification for a decision that they've already made, that they want to curtail this inquiry. So we really need to push back, and we need to push back hard.
100%. I just note there's been a comment by Belinda Harvey. Of course, Belinda Harvey was deceived into a relationship by Bob Lambert. Someone who's been deeply affected by what the events that have been covered already during this tranche and the previous tranches of the inquiry. Someone for whom the next tranches of the inquiry won't affect her life. But like so many of the undercover people who are affected by undercover policing are demanding that this continues, despite the fact it doesn't personally affect them. And I think that's really key, that we, as the people who are the non-state core participants, are speaking with one voice on all of this. So please do join us, do support this. It's very straightforward. Please check out the link. Please encourage others to do so. I think that's it, really.
I think that's it. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. I'm going to quickly try and eat some lunch. We're about to go back in 5 minutes' time for the afternoon session of John Bowsher at the Undercover Policing Inquiry, last day of Phase 3 of Tranche 3.
And his evidence is very good.
Dynamite. Absolute dynamite. Please